Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages, the time is now, the place is here, and you are listening to Café Unconscious.
And somebody's quite conscious. How many coffees in are you tonight?
Not enough, buddy.
Yeah, it's like 11 o'clock p.m. and this is when we could find the time. Once again, this is the show. It's two dads finding time when we can, and it's 11 p.m. on a Sunday night. We made the goal of posting our show every Monday, so we're going to see if we can pull this off. And I'm going to make the claim right up front. This is going to be the funnest Twin Peaks podcast you ever heard. That's the objective tonight.
I didn't realize that you were actually going to share that piece of boasting
Yes.
with the audience. Hey, let me go ahead and just say right now, go ahead and like and subscribe, everybody, so that when Anthony cannot satisfy that claim, we've already got you. We got you.
Yeah. And you could let me hear about it too. I have another claim, a bigger boast than that. I believe that I have created the greatest public list of 100 or more Twin Peaks questions that's ever been posted in a public way. I don't think I have the greatest list ever, but as far as people who have shared, my question list is like up around 600, but I have 6 rounds of 20 questions that I posted on my old show, and I'm going to pull from that list, running through a bunch of these questions in like sort of speed rounds with you tonight.
Okay,
I
so
think
the game here tonight is let's see how few words I can use while answering questions. That's the game. That's the object of said game.
Well, I'm going to make the rules up as we speak. And rule number one is you get green, yellow, and red. All right, red, you get only 2 reds the whole night. Red means you get to go longer than 90 seconds. All right?
So in your world, you mean red means go. I am
Red means go. Yellow
I'm
means
so messed up already.
all right, we'll say red you can go longer than 2 minutes. Yellow means a minute to 2 minutes. And green is, a minute or less. And by all means, you could say like you could do like a 5-second answer. Because my goal is to go through as many of these as we possibly can, starting with question number 10 from round one. Is there any significance to Tammy being prone to getting car sick? Apparently, she's big on getting car sick. Any significance to that?
No.
Okay, that was easy. That was a green. What exactly do you think is happening as the boxing match that Sarah Palmer is watching appears to be playing on a loop? Or at least that's the scene that we're seeing appears to be playing on a loop. What do you think's happening there?
I think that the more I investigate about the relationship between Lynch's interest in physics, time, and I watch things that have to do with the nature of time, the more I realize how important it is to him, right? I don't think that scene would be necessarily as important as the temporal time displacement that happens between Jeffries and Agent Cooper in the FBI building and Firewalk with Me. Clearly, that's a pivotal type of thing. But in some way, isn't this just sort of like a signal to us as the viewers that now what we're dealing with, who we're dealing with, better said, there's a nature of time displacement and they are comfortable with it. That to them this does not read as awkward. And doesn't it also sort of indicate that whatever's happening time wise, she is either manipulating it because her time is unchanged by that, right? So she's either manipulating it or she's sort of aware and she's sort of okay. So I think there's more of a signaling that's happening there than trying to decode that itself for a meaning, right? The meaning comes later. The meaning comes later. Who is this Why is that so? How could they put themselves there? How could they go back and forth ripping people from this place and that place chronologically? Because this person can somehow manipulate time like other people that we've seen in the property. How am
And
I
then
doing thus far?
so
Are
far
we
good. Yeah,
okay? All right.
good. And again, I'm giving myself the easy role tonight for now, at least at this point in the show. Um, by the way, is the other scene that she watches on TV, is that also on a loop? Because I
I
don't
believe,
remember.
yeah, the you're talking about the animal scene.
Yeah.
I believe that it is. I believe that it is. I believe that there are elements of it that are, right?
Yeah, I never really thought about that before. It's not like in an obvious way. I can't find my question, but there's an extra unlabeled coffee in the Lucky Seven insurance office, and it happens to be green tea, a green tea latte. Is that just for comedy's sake? Is there something going on there? Do you have any thoughts on that as a fellow
Reminds
coffee
me, we're
drinker?
so smack dab sometimes in the middle of the cigar is just a cigar speech.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, some clearly sometimes things are played for comedy. Sometimes the guy's just pushing a broom for 2.5 minutes, making you wish something else would happen. You know what I mean? I mean, I believe. I believe because look, on top of everything else, a lot of times playing with your expectation as the unintended recipient of that expectation is part of the gag. It's part of the game, right? And that will do certain things. Certain bells will go off, and then because they were unfulfilled or unrealized, then your guard will sort of be down the next time, and then you're smacked in the face with something. Right. So yeah, I think it's the same as a person, it's the same as a writer's aptitude to toy with the literary medium, rewarding the reader for making the choice to read and playing the word games that come along with that, burying things from here that will come back, that
Hmm.
that that sort of thing, right? And I think that Lynch was maybe the master of uh, what to do with expectation and how to use it.
Yeah, I don't want to get into it now, but I was watching the first half of The Straight Story today. After setting up my mom's new TV, she finally got a smart TV, and I was trying to walk her through how to use that. And the first thing I put on was The Straight Story, just to test like the picture and the sound and whatnot. And man, he is masterful. Lynch really is.
I like
The first 5 minutes of that movie is absolutely just perfection.
there's some sort of a heartwarming story there, though, about you, like you're reaching out to your mother and going like, this is something that I would like, but this is as far as you're allowed to go into the thing that I like
Yeah.
here with this guy. So let's agree about this. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
let's
The
face
5 minutes is enough. And I needed a better TV at her house for all, you know. All right, this is a green question. What is the most important shot in all of Twin Peaks? Gut instinct.
Laura whispering to Cooper
Okay.
across time. That shot in any, it's always the same in my estimation. By the way, no matter what when we see them. But yeah, that's but the answer to that is because the real truth, the truth that you and me can never really hang on to, it's being said. Not the truth that we already know, but the truth, the truth.
Has Mike used anyone other than Philip Gerard as a host? Um, is this question one that even makes sense, or are my assumptions off? Like, for example, is host the wrong idea or the wrong word altogether? Is I think our knowledge of the Mike Bob relationship comes exclusively from Mike's own words. And can we assume those are credible?
May I ask a question about your question
Yes.
prior to answering your question?
Yes.
Did you devise this question after having spoken to me about the nature of Mike, or do you know?
No. Now, almost all of these questions, in fact, probably all of them, were composed in my car driving to work mostly, straight from my voice to my phone to my old Twitter account. So these would just be random things I would like spit out in the car, often while listening to some Twin Peaks content. I used to listen to a lot of that stuff, not so much anymore.
Absolutely.
So that's just so you'd get it. I always like the podcast for that reason because what they're saying is fine. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's interesting, but what it would do for me is give me like it would send my own mind reeling. So that's the relationship with podcasts that I always had, and that's always what I try to create myself. Not necessarily having like the end word, but just to get people
Yeah,
kicked.
well, and for clarity purposes, you're not disparaging the act of doing that or hitting a specific limit, if you will. I was talking to a listener,
Hmm.
um, and I made the comment that, sometimes one of the greater sacrifices of doing is not being able to participate anymore. And
Hmm.
that's certainly true. I was speaking directly of creating content. The past couple of weeks with all of my free time, it's been so sort of embedded with creating the clips for the page or the supplemental material with the images overlaid to sort of better clarify where I'm coming from. But as a result of that, right, those hours that you dedicated to listening to people's angles and takes,
Yeah.
they're the first things that get chucked out the window, and that's by no fault of anything else besides time.
Yes.
So let me head to your question real fast, and hopefully this will not be something that you hear a lot of, but I
And
recognize
and do you want to use a green, a yellow, or a red chip for this
you're
one?
gonna need. I tell you what you're gonna need to do, buddy. You might need to just take all those reds and just cash them,
You get two. You get two if you.
because look, a lot of the people who listen to this show, I would assume that they aren't here to just fall into a few quippy things and hey, we all agree about this. And a lot of the nature of this is hearing challenging concepts, maybe concepts you disagree with or what have you. I I'm sort of astonished to hear that in a world away from sort of the materials that we've discussed, you may be the only other person I've ever heard say, why is where did we learn to accept the fact that Mike has only inhabited one person, right? And that the direct linkage is there. What's convoluted about that, of course, Anthony, is that the nature of Mike is unknowable in a way that the nature of almost every other lodge entity is not as unknowable. And think about how complicated that is. They're all unknowable to a certain degree. Mike is worse than the rest. Mike, we don't have a consensus within the community on what Mike's relationship to the arm is. Is Mike the totality of the arm meets the body that Mike inhabits minus arm, making a fuller thing, a thing with shadow, right? Is the arm now a specific entity unto itself? And Mike is a specific entity unto itself after having seen the creator, right? God, the face of God, whom I believe it makes sense that Mike would have seen the face of God hanging out in the Fat Trout Trailer Park because Laura had a relationship with the people over there, yada, yada, yada. But I also think it stands to reason that Mike cut off his arm and then went to find a vessel that his arm could not participate with. So it makes sense to me that Mike would have found Philip Gerard, a person who was around Twin Peaks. He was looking for a person that he could go into, and his arm could not be a part of it. That's sort of how it reads to me. I mean, I don't think that it would make any sense that if the full Mike with his arm, right, isn't the point the arm is severed? So now he has to inhabit somebody with the severed arm. Everybody's implication is, well, no, Mike made Philip Gerard cut off his arm. Well, that's not what Philip Gerard tells you. Philip Gerard tells you he knows precisely how he lost his arm, and he recalls the story, right? So it sounds to me like he was very cognizant of all of those things, which to me plays like Mike purposely found him. It's a backward thing. So my belief is yes, he does inhabit other people, and I think that there's a case to be made that it could have been Cliff Howard.
Oh, okay. I could run with that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stick with the plan. Could have been Cliff Howard. Um, let's see. Is Windom Earl a free agent or is he like maybe part of a team of some sort?
Can you Please put that in the form of a question. Sorry, I'm just clarify that a little bit, my brother.
Is he working as a member of a larger unit, or is he a solo player in whatever his endeavor is, whatever his goals are?
I guess it depends on what perspective you're going to come from. From the show, for well, the show, the narrative of the show, whether it be in your personal unconscious or just the thing we're watching, the thing we all watch together,
Hmm.
would seem to indicate that he's acting independently. And it would seem, in and of the fact that he's using esoteric practices that have long been practiced to get to what he's getting to, right? Are there other people who practice similar to things? Sure. Is he aware of them? I can't say that for certain, but for his methods, for what he's attempting to accomplish, like all psychosis, it's a singular vision, right? Like he's out to do the one thing he's out to do.
You know when Dougie Cooper is at his
Inspector Cooper.
the first meeting that we see in the Lucky Seven insurance office, and he speaks like kind of lucidly when he says he's lying when I forget the Tom Sizemore character's name. I'm drawing a blank. But yeah, like all of a sudden Dougie's like speaking clearly just for a moment. We see like this green flashing light pass. He goes, he's lying. Who is that speaking there?
Well, I think as part of the show, I don't think I'm interpreting. We're supposed to know that um, some of the deeply maybe I don't know if they're making a call for like the hereditary nature of him necessarily, but something deeply embedded into his person, perhaps his archetype, even if it's vacant as it could possibly be. Deeply embedded in that are some things that are always comprised of an investigator, something that is trying to seek out the truth, something that's on alert for falsity, right? Something that admires authority and truth and justice, right? And it's deeply embedded inside there, right? To some way that it looks archetypal. Right?
Is speaking of detectives, is Audrey a successful detective in Twin Peaks: The Return? Audrey Horn.
No, no,
Okay. Do you care to elaborate or no?
sure. Um, Audrey's story, for anybody who's heard any of these materials before, hey guys, if you're with us, I hope you're enjoying this right now. It's a little bit different than our normal show, whereas I will talk for 35 minutes, given every question, if you're lucky. Audrey is the doorway per which I walked to start to ask, now, firstly, what's the nature of the music and the music cues? Why are they reacting to music cues? I know there's a music cue. I'm a guy watching a television show. Why are you reacting to the music cue? Right? And that sort of that inverted thing that was happening, right? My speculation a decade ago was perhaps this is all Audrey. We knew that Mulholland Drive was going to be a vehicle to continue the story of Audrey. And so naturally, I thought, well, if somebody is going to be a dreamer and you're telling me you could have continued this story, then perhaps that was it. And the further that I went, then of course we got the return and all of that was decimated. Who knows what it would have actually grown up to be had it not been the thing that it did grow up to be, right? But we have what we have now. But Audrey sometimes Audrey represents something like the closest approximation to the potential you have or could have had and the recognition of whimsy and magic and belief in yourself and whatever. Sometimes she's that, right? And then likewise, right, being young and being youthful, her representing that. Likewise, she then becomes the exact opposite, right? Like the what is your potential when it's wasted? What are your raw feelings when life didn't turn out the way that you planned? Right? But then I go back to Audrey's being manipulated by music cues, and now it's actually fed to you. It's actually given to you, where they call the song's name, the name from the
Mhm.
soundtrack that you own, that I own, right? And Audrey is now dancing to her song from a soundtrack from a television show, right? All of that sort of satisfied that initial impulse that I had where it looked to me like, well, Leland is trying to go against the cue. He doesn't want to dance, but he is dancing, but he's freaking out and breaking down. He's not doing what the cue wants. Audrey is. She just realizes that the cue is in the air, right? And that's our first indication that something dream-like is happening, and it's given to us by her, right? So, but no, I don't see that her investigation went successfully. I think that she's been, blinded by the what we all are, sort of. And I know that's soft philosophizing, but kind of blinded by what we all are when life didn't go the way that we planned. She's more irritated at the circumstance than investigatory any longer. You know,
Doesn't she have some sort of breakthrough though? Like if she is at least within the realm of your theory, if she's some sort of proxy perhaps for Carrie Page or the Dreamer to do a little bit of internal investigation work, doesn't she have a breakthrough while Eddie Vedder's, who's using his real name, is singing about all these like identity crisis issues? Like, isn't all this converging to move the dreamer closer to the real world, or
what?
no?
Well, I'm glad that you asked a follow-up question because, yeah, Anthony, I think that in both series, we'll call it the original 1 and 2, and then later, we have these direct references to number one, this is an investigation of self. Here's some signals to tell you that investigating what's happening, how you feel about it, what you should do with it, that's part of what's going on. You should do more of it. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Well, Invitation to Love is precisely that. As far as I can see, Invitation to Love is a show that will either mimic the events of Twin Peaks or it will, or Twin Peaks will mimic the events of it, right? And in some way, this is a sign to the dreamer that the thing they are watching, Twin Peaks, the world, they can extract meaning from it. And that meaning will go to help themselves, right? They can, which is individuation as far as I'm concerned, or reaching self as far as I'm concerned. The purpose of that is it's to signal to you this is a drama that right, like the drama that they watch can't possibly predict what happens around them, right?
Hmm.
This drama, it knows what happens in Twin Peaks, it knows what happens in you, dreamer. It knows. Investigate that. So in some way I think that is true, just as I think that the dreamer showing Audrey break away from the show by understanding it's a show, right? So what is that saying? It's saying snap, saying wake up. The literally something that we hear, right? You've got to wake up. You've got to snap out of this,
Hmm.
recognize the true severity of your situation, and then you've got to pull forward. Whether or not Audrey is an archetype or a symbol or more likely a complex, whether or not that goes to help her as an autonomous being, I don't know that I see evidence of that. I mean, how let's assume how terrifying that would really be if you were in such a cognitive fugue that you woke up in a different circumstance than you thought you were living a second ago, right? So I don't see that really helps the individual Audrey Horn, right? But I do see that seeing it from the dreamer's perspective, seeing that this thing snapped out of something, and that the show is now going like, hey, this is it's a soundtrack from a song, this iconic dance. She did this on this show. Take a look at this. You need to snap out of it, right? You need to snap out of that show. I think that that's important.
Gonna go to my original first question. The famous line, "We live inside a dream." Who's we?
The archetypes. Next.
What are some other answers?
You want to be all fluffy about it. You want to have no, if we don't mind our word economy, we'll say everybody, right? We're all in some dream of sort. I agree to that, but I don't agree that it's meta for meta's sake. Because that's meta for meta's sake, right? If you and I, if we create a television show and we start off with the idea that, like, well, this impacts everybody. So everything that you see on this is really just everybody. Everybody's a surrogate for everybody else. Nobody's anything else. No, this the real stakes, none. It's just about the viewer on the other side of the screen. I don't buy that. I do buy though that yeah, Mark Frost has probably tossed over the philosophy of thinking, and by the way, I recognize that when it comes to, hey, we live inside a dream, the language, the ethics of that, we're talking very Lynchian in origin, right? But I also think that with Frost being a Jungian and that being so contingent on dream logic of the time, especially in the 20s when everybody lost their mind about the analysis of dreams, right? Because what are these? Like now people are writing about it. I think that they would have tossed around, hey, in terms of what happens, we all live in sort of a simulation of this. We all have imaginary avatars in our mind. We could all go this way instead of that way. We'll all play things out to its logical conclusion in our brain to make the choices that we make. Some of our deepest dreams and desires will never go to die. We'll revisit them. I do think that there's a lot of that. But at the end of the day, who lives inside of the dream? It's the participants of the soap opera, later the drama, created by the dreamer, intended to help them start to recollect and reassemble parts of themselves to face repressions they've long since buried and become a fuller version of themselves to live a happier life.
If you were to have an unexpected, well, now it would be extremely unexpected encounter with Mark Frost or David Lynch, and it was a 60-second encounter, which one or two questions can you imagine suddenly blurting out of your mouth? Or would you want to ask?
Um, I toggle back and forth on this between flat out asking, "Hey, can you promise me you guys won't do a season four?" and not saying anything whatsoever, right? Above all else, I think it's important. Like if it lest, I think theories are fun, hypotheses are interesting. It's nice to chase threads, and if it makes the thing track better for somebody, then that's great. I'm under the assumption that that's what all the book sales about people who have their theories who release a published work are about. But I don't want that from him. You know, I don't really want that from him. I would probably ask about the music because, like I said, the music is the first thing that bit me. Where because I wouldn't give the game away for me if I said the characters are aware of the music cues, right? And it's those words, right? Because that's a these are production terminologies,
Hmm.
and I'm sure he would say something like, "That's super interesting." That could be the case, right? Which I think is about as close to a confirmation. Although who knows? These days he might just be sending it out to everyone. But I've seen some flat out rejections of like, no, yeah, I don't. You're not watching the same show I'm watching. I've seen some flat out rejections. And normally when you've gotten your toe pretty close to the warm end, he'll say something to the effect of, "Oh, that sounds like it might be true, or it could be true, or that might be happening, something like that." Right?
On the drive back from my mother's house today, I had a bunch of uh, songs on a playlist playing, and it was performances from the Roadhouse from season three, Twin Peaks, and some of them we skipped over. But anyway, do you think collectively the choices of songs or performances at the Roadhouse is serving any kind of function
Sure.
other than just adding, music that they wanted in the show to be in the show?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes if it feels like the song is perfectly aligning to the message or maybe trying to wrap it up or something like that, it's like, everything we know about Lynch and sound in general would point to the guy has never made a decision in terms of sound. In fact, if anything, it seems to be that the thought process behind sound, the premeditation, is tenfold by comparison of being on the ground and shooting things, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a lot more scripted than people like to give credit to. Um, but yeah, absolutely. There's no sound that you will ever hear in any David Lynch work that doesn't have a very specific reason for being there.
Who do you think is most human? Judy, Bob, Billy, or Alice? Alice Tremond.
That's a really interesting pull
Can
of
I come back to
question.
that question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh,
I have a
yeah.
better one. I have a better
Okay.
one.
Cool.
Sorry about that. Pluck Larry David out of Curb Your Enthusiasm and set him loose in Twin Peaks. What do we
Okay.
get? Is he Jacoby Shrink or is he doing something else?
No, he's the Truman's father. Irrefutably. Irrefutably. Right? That doesn't now look. That doesn't work in terms of people's age, but who cares? Who cares?
I want him running. If the only season four I want is one with Larry David in it.
Just Larry David being irritated. He's talking about the pie. This is the pie? You're like, yeah, it's just yeah.
One character from The Sopranos that should be in Twin Peaks, borrow from one show, drop him into another. Who would that be?
Polly Walnuts without fail.
Even better question. Which is a better ending? Twin Peaks: The Return or The Sopranos?
Oh, terrible. Terrible news. Terrible for my Twin Peaks credibility.
And are they similar endings or not?
Similar. I think so. I think they
Yeah.
are. I think they're similar. Um, totally different perspectives, but yes, I do think that they're similar. They're similar in that Twin Peaks, the show, didn't end where two people are on the street and then all the lights in the entire world went out and they just walk around the world now. You know what I'm saying? Like, if that was your reading of the show, I'm fairly certain that's not what occurred. But the all the lights in the entire world went off and they were like, well, this is garbage, but they just kept going. Just as I don't think that when the lights go out on The Sopranos, which is why it's such an interesting correlation, right? Or an interesting thing to juxtapose. When the lights go out there, and our assumption is, well, as we were told plenty of times, Tony died. I don't think that's precisely what happened. Yes, I think it is what happened, but I think the perspective is different than what we see it as. We tend to see it as this is our perspective. We watch this show like every fan has watched a show ever, and now we, the audience, have been whacked, has been indicated, or Tony's been whacked, or both of us, and the show is over, and whatever. It's very, congratulations. It's it's very deep. Um, to answer your question, there is no show that ever had a better finale than The Sopranos, and there never will be. I've spent an incredible amount of time thinking about Twin Peaks, Twin Peaks in general, but it's the finale. I spent an incredible amount of time reading blogs and watching YouTube videos, an embarrassing amount of time watching YouTube videos where people talk about. I still do. I don't even know how I do. Right? It doesn't. There's no logic behind that. Maybe I'm in a mirror someplace in a mental institution, trying to wake
Hmm.
up at any given moment
Yeah.
because the time is not making sense to me anymore.
Yeah, there's a 40% chance of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's more than 40. So there's no doubt of which one is more endearing to me. But in terms of the execution of something and how what it did culturally, and now if you think about it with some time removed, could the Sopranos have ended any way that would have ever appeased you? Oh, we wiped out the New York crew. We everybody lives happily ever after. Tony doesn't need Prozac no more. The world's great. You know what I mean? Like what? Like there was no, or hey, the Jersey crew is totally wiped off the face of the map. We get to see it for a long time. Let's spend time with the New York crew now and call it that. there's nothing's going to appease you, right? It had to end the way that it ended. But what are you? What do you? What? I'll tell you what. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Sopranos Unconscious. This is uh this is Tommy, and so
Now you're gonna claim now you're gonna claim I'm sitting here eating noodles and sauce.
yeah,
Whatever the
you
hell
are
that
you are
means.
eating
Where
the
are you
sauce. I know you're
from?
eating sauce.
Where
I
are
know
you
you're having
from,
sauce
man?
right now.
I mean,
Uh,
noodles and sauce. Well, I've never heard that expression in my life. That's crazy. I was shoveling down macaroni before I started this tonight, actually, and I was cracking up thinking of you. He's eating noodles and sauce again.
okay,
I haven't seen The Sopranos in 20 years.
all right. So I'm going to ask you
So
right now. You've investigated Twin Peaks as now you've investigated Twin Peaks as much as anybody. Maybe not in the sheer raw number of views, right? Like a lot of people are prone to do.
yeah.
A lot of strange people in this world that are prone to watch that show a lot, like it's going to change, and then somehow it does. Um, but you've had, a
Yeah.
lot more
I've spread it
conversations about
already.
it than the average person ever will, the average
Yeah.
superfan ever will, and with the most high profile of people who have these conversations, right? Be that as it may. When you think about The Sopranos, and then we'll get into what I think is happening in the ending. What do you think happened on The Sopranos?
I think the music is super important, but I'm not exactly sure what happened. But I think the music is like almost a character in some way. And it was innovative. So one of the things that happens in The Sopranos is filmmakers are doing something that is noteworthy.
Okay,
So it's not a meta thing necessarily, but they are saying what can be done with an ending and what has been done and what kind of ending do we want to have. And I do think there's a little Twin Peaks nod in there as far as like the open-endedness, the interpretability of it. Um, but I don't know, the feeling of that
you're
particular
right
song.
here. Just walk through the door. Just
No, I
come
don't have
through the
any
door.
door to walk through. I'm not a door walker.
Yes, you are.
But
Don't lie to yourself.
but I
It's
do
okay.
think, yeah, I think one of the things that is happening is that it's in an effective way, not in some sort of ineffective or tacky way. Like it's almost in some way it's totally within the world of the show. You're sucked in, but it's also drawing attention to itself as like a as a creation, you know, and it's it's not self-congratulatory, but it's really cool. It's like innovative. They they succeeded. You know, and I do think there's a bit of a Twin Peaks nod in terms of how they went about succeeding. My understanding is that David Chase was a huge Twin Peaks fan and that he shares a similar philosophy on closure
Yes.
as David Lynch has often expressed. So I'm
Though he's
not
accidentally slipped up a few times in a way that David Lynch never did in interviews and what have you. Okay.
been 20 years though since I watched it, to be honest. And
No analysis
I
videos or
remember reading
nothing?
I remember reading a lot of blogs and whatnot, and a lot of like interpretations of the mural on the wall in the restaurant. And I don't remember any of what anybody said.
Yeah.
But
Well,
do I think Tony Soprano is dead at that moment? Mm, gun to my head, I would say yeah. But
yeah.
you know, is it the guy in the jet? I don't know. I almost think it's not the guy in the jacket who goes
No.
into the bathroom because that's like too on the nose, you know,
Okay.
as far as like classic mob hit type thing. I don't think that's what's happening. Who knows? I assume you have a theory on this, but I wanted to ask about Mulholland Drive actually. But if you want to give your little take on the ending, go ahead.
Okay. So go do some because you'll love this. And you do love this.
Yeah, I probably won't, but go ahead.
What
I'm lazy.
what is
It's
this?
summer, man. I'm not. I don't feel like reading anything about TV right now.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Forget About It with Anthony. With Anthony. Just render the point useless, Anthony.
I might be.
The audience appreciates your candor. Um, Tony watches himself get whacked. Go back and watch it.
Okay.
He he sees himself sitting at the diner. It's a purposeful edit, not the only edit in the show, by the way, that does that. Where Tony walks into the scene or he watches himself go into a scene and the perspective. So the camera will show you Tony looks at this and this happened. Tony looks over here and that happens. Tony looks over here, that happens. Tony does this and Tony walks into the frame, right? From that, and then there's a time jump, boom. Now he's sitting at the table and everything that's happening around him is somehow indicative of the show itself. From the episode of Members Only to the painting, right? All of these things from what we know culturally about going to the bathroom, finding the gun, right?
Yeah,
It
what is that? So what does that mean? One watches themselves. What do you mean? Like Diane outside the motel watching
no,
herself?
it's very awkward how it's edited. It's this very intentional edit that happens twice. There's lots of people who talk about it. I'm not unearthing some brand new thing.
Yeah.
Um, where they show a point of view and then Tony seems to walk into his own point of view, and it's staggering when it happens. Your mind will go, "Wait, what just happened?" And so the intention to make that type of shot happen through that cut that has first of all you have to set that concept up before you go as far as to shoot it, right? Because to pace it where you're looking through his eyes until the second where you're sort of like a guy looking and then all of a sudden he comes into the frame, then time jumps and he's in the booth and he's sort of watching himself there, right? And now it's from the perspective of the booth. And so I think that what happens is that Tony is seeing this. Now to the Sopranos, probably in a heaven or something like that, I would have not possibly opened my mouth about the afterlife in concerns to the Sopranos until they made the prequel film. And if you haven't seen the prequel film, this is not a spoiler, it's the intro of the film.
Hmm.
Christopher Moltisanti is talking to you from beyond the grave, from his grave.
Oh, okay.
By the way, I think that that's not a good decision. I don't think that's a good decision for the show. I think they're so clever about the way that they hid those things. You never really knew if this was people's consciousness playing on, like especially the things that happen with
Hmm.
like Paulie, where the guilt of what he's done, but he can't process it as guilt. He doesn't have the mental space to process the guilt of this. He's not going to do that, but it wears on him, right? So the question persists: is he experiencing supernatural things, or is it just him? And the fact that it never answers that is really great.
Hmm.
Having Chrissy talk to you from beyond the grave, right, in real time, that answers the question. Yes, the supernatural does in fact exist in The Sopranos. And that's a shame. That's a shame that that question was answered, right? I didn't like that, but I do believe now because of that that when we watch Tony watch his death, his assassination, that it's from his perspective and that he's added a bunch of things that happened throughout his time that we see on the show in that diner. Because it's just too on the nose. Guy in the members only jacket who's super suspicious, right? So yeah, go watch some analysis videos on the actual editing of that diner scene, and you'll be like, wow, that you really went out of your way to make that happen.
Yeah, well, that sounds cool.
It is. It's very
Maybe I
cool.
will take some time for that.
It's excellent filmmaking.
Yeah, and the use of the song is just really amazing also.
Now
Uh,
we doing a Bronx Tale or what? What are we doing now?
well, I got some Bronx Tale names for you. I got Judy, I got Bob, Billy, Alice. And interesting names, huh? These are just all classic sort of 50s Americana names. But which one of those is most human, in your opinion? We're back to Twin Peaks now.
Yeah, thank you. Shockingly enough, I'm going to go with Judy. I know that might sound like it's just the most weird of the things to pull, but I don't think so. I think because I do believe that the dreamer has inflated the concept of the great mother. And I think that the terror and the respect and the adoration and the petrification, all those things, the reverence everybody feels for Judy, that whole thing. I think that there's a more well-rounded quality of that. No, I don't know, man. Did anybody change more in the course of the series than Sarah? Now, I understand you're not asking necessarily about Sarah, but I think we were given plenty of evidence from the show to go like, oh, she's at least to Judy's at least to Sarah as Waiter is to Fireman, right? At the very least, I don't think that's the case. I think they're the same. I think they're one and the same, and not like they're saying. I mean, I think they're one and the same at the same time during the show.
What do you mean?
We talked about this on the last episode where I said, as opposed to being an inhabiting spirit, it looks to me that once the Judy code is cracked, once Judy has shown up, by the time we come to seeing Sarah Palmer, we either never see Sarah Palmer or we're seeing what's basically a hybrid. And I think that has a lot to do with the dreamer laying the blame to the
Hmm.
mother's feet because she was the person most likely to had done something to prevent the awful things that happened to the dreamer, things that parallel Laura Palmer. And so but I do think that the person struggles with that. I think the dreamer struggles with that, Anthony, where they have both good and bad things to think about that character. Think about this. Think about how the scene is set up
I'm
when
here.
when Sarah kills the truck driver. Think about, or at least the bar attendant, but the truck driver. Think about how that scene is set up. That scene's not set up for you to empathize with some stranger who was drunk off his ass, talked a little bit way too far, right? But still, did he deserve to get murdered in cold blood? But the way the scene is made, you hate that guy. So you're on Judy slash Sarah's side. Something to be said about the way that the dreamer's constructing how you take in all of that, right? Because it's
And
not
also
just
is the fact that there's no blood on that guy's neck evidence that the events, at least some of the events in this show, are not really happening.
I'll be honest, I've never considered that before. I just think sometimes sometimes there's something uncanny about the hollow nature of violence that Lynch depicts. Sometimes that because look, we're so accustomed to like if it can be comically horror. They get their arm cut off, blood is squirting everywhere. Everybody's
Mm.
slipping and falling like banana peels. There's that. But we're so immune to like blood and stuff. So sometimes that thing can make you feel more out of body than anything else, right? Like the fresh that whole thing. Lynch is just wonderful with that. As to whether or not there's a that plays into the idea. Well, hey, in real life, if Judy were to kill this guy, it's like I don't know. I don't know if it was thought that through.
Now, why does in Fire Walk with Me, why does Jeffries insist, and he's very insistent on not talking about Judy? I mean, at all. Why do you think that is?
Because, well, first of all, it's weird how our mind changed about this, and I'm sure that this is retro activated, by the way, what I'm about to say. I accept that. I accept that all the stuff, I don't know if we need to disclaimer this every single time, but clearly, when we talk about positions on Twin Peaks, we are going with the retroactive decisions that were processed because they did. They changed the lore, right? Or they at least added to it or made it make sense or whatever they had to do. That's what we have left, right?
Hmm.
As much as anything else, Jeffries is afraid of who he's talking in the company of. As much as anything else, right? We heard from Gordon that the plan is for Jeffries they know about Jaude. So that we hear that, right? But the first thing he does is he's very accusatory toward this temporal concept that you and I we've spoken of briefly over the phone, as we're so prone to do, where it could possibly be that Jeffries is emerging from the return timeline. He's at least returning from a timeline where Mr. C has already taken over Cooper and or at least taking Cooper's place, and he's out there in the world. He's you know th that I think is shown to us in the return that and then furthermore that's hammered by the fact that Jeffries is himself capable of manipulating time. And Jeffries, the minute we see him, there's a question about Jeffries and time. I was discussing with you on the phone recently, and then we will get into a very deep episode about this topic, so we won't go into it very much here. But I was discussing with you how my belief is that Jeffries went from the hotel to the meeting that takes place above the convenience store and then to the FBI. But we have no idea how long he was there. We can't take it on good faith that he went from the hotel then to the FBI. And at some point previous to that, he'd been at the meeting. He sees it in his mind. We see it overlaid on the screen. We can't take that in good faith. Jeffries can manipulate time. Who are we to say that he did not implant himself there? Who are we to say that he didn't put himself there, right? The sort of strange Jeffries, the Jeffries who talks out of sequence,
Hmm.
right? How are we to know that? How are we to know at what moment that's truly happening in the lifespan, I guess you could say, of Jeffries? All we know for sure is that he has evidence that Cooper may not be Cooper. And he's confused about what year he's accidentally gone to. Wouldn't that also play like he meant for himself to go to someplace, right? So he's capable of doing that. He already knows he's capable of doing that. And then, of course, we see that he is,
What if he
right?
wasn't there at all?
What do you
And
mean by that? Qualify it.
he wasn't there. He was he was in Cooper's dream, and when Cooper says, "Hey, it's 10:10. Remember that dream I had?"
Okay.
Then we see the dream that Cooper had.
I've heard
That
this.
and
Now let
that's
me
what we
stop you.
actually see. Could that be
Remember
possible?
when remember when David Lynch brings it up in the return? Remember when Jeffries talks to him about having seen him? So we've put that to bed. That theory can go to bed. Right? I've heard people bring that theory up before, like, well, wait a minute. You know, Cooper said he was in a dream, and then we see this thing, and it's like, well, that may have actually been where they were originally heading,
Is
right?
uh is it a partial Jeffries that we see in the Philadelphia office? Is it like a fragmented Jeffries? Is it like a non-integrated Jeffries? Is it the full? Is it really the full Jeffries? Just like
We can never know that.
dropping in for like a quick field report or something? Or
We can never know that. I would love to know that. This goes back to a conversation we had before. We'll just touch base on it briefly.
and also, is it better to is it simply a scene that's cool and maybe it's not even supposed to mean like maybe it's just it's artistic, it's cool, and that's it.
That's a matter. I think two things about that. One, no, it's not. I think this is a scene that is directly influenced by David Lynch's emerging, I think at the time, love of learning, at least to hearing concepts in physics. One, two. I think it boils down to the old two writers working by two different methods type of thing. Was it originally something that was very cool? I think maybe he wanted to show you, time displacement, right? I think originally there was an idea like, oh, that's an interesting concept. What would that look like? And like, this is what it would look like fueled by surrealism. And yet, but now there's points to it. And I think Mark Frost is more completionist than that. I think the fact that it comes back up again, Jeffries is so, crucial to what happens, getting us to the finale. I think that obviously, Jeffries' ability to manipulate time is crucial to this story. Whether or not Jeffries in that story is only a fraction of Jeffries is unknowable to us because we don't know Jeffries. I think that would be an interesting thing to see. I'm far more interested in seeing backstory, side stories from Twin Peaks at this point, right? Even if we don't agree that it's canon, even if we don't agree, we would be wrong. Mark Frost can full create canon, and there's no one who can tell him otherwise, right?
The
It's his.
You said stuff that was so smart, and my only response is like the stupidest question that just popped into my head.
I don't know
So
if I
sorry
did
for
that.
that.
I'm not sure I
Um,
did that.
there's like a lot of like Wizard of Oz stuff going on in David Lynch's work. And
Sure.
is is there like a is there a scarecrow or a lion
That's
in
a super
in Twin
interesting question.
Peaks? If if Jeffries is the Tin Man, is are the other characters there?
I don't see that. I don't see that. I catch the, look, we all know Judy probably got the name Judy, but Judy's been so sort of changed from what it was meant to be and all of that in a way that doesn't even really bear, walking through all the steps because you can't really glean anything from it now. Um, I don't see any evidence that there's a direct overlay, probably because he was going to be so busy actually doing a direct overlay, right? He made that film.
Um, what what did I want to say about Diane? I'm gonna ask something else instead. Like part eight with the bomb, and then we see Bob's face staring at us, or Bob is like making like hardcore eye contact with somebody or something. But Bob is like riding the like the spewing egg type stuff coming out of the
From
bomb.
Mother. From
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And you get like hardcore Bob eye contact there. And is he taunting the fireman? Is he looking at something else? Is somebody looking at him? Do you have any thoughts on that? Or is it just like a
I have
nostalgia?
a lot of thoughts on the origin. I have a lot of thoughts on the origin. And I don't know if that's precisely what you're asking, but specifically, I think that the origin
That
is from the
specific, yeah, that specific shot, we really get like a lingering shot
it's
of
the
Bob
dreamer.
looking at us. And then we see it later, in the fireman's joint where he's kind of looking at the same scene.
This is look, man, I know this is very I know this is simple, but this is what your brain on justification looks like. Under the hood, this is what your brain, the leaps that you are willing to go to hold on to your core beliefs. My goodness, how we live in a world where that's true,
Mhm.
right? If you could see the mechanics of that,
So this is like cognitive dissonance
oh
jacked
my!
up to 100.
But I think that
Physically.
anything you are so desperate to ward the world off from taking away from you, right? The backstory of, well, how did this happen, right? Because otherwise, who knows if it's even a good idea to try to come up with an origin story for Bob. It slightly defiles the way that the origin story is
Mhm.
is told to us, all of that. But that has nothing to do with anything. By the time we're looking at Edward Hopper paintings come to life, it should be very clear to us, right? Like, oh, this is a composite at the very least. So Bob coming into frame, Bob, the that is all inspired by the dreamer. Every scene is inspired by the dreamer in that case. And yes, I could say that about everything, but this is it's so on the nose when paintings come to life throughout this origin. So beginning with that and that shot, right? The need to design why this truth can never be defeated. My dad couldn't have done that whole like thing. Then there's Mark Frost on record saying, well, it was all metaphorical and just skipping, like just saying it, whoop, and out the door, on to the next thing. It's all metaphorical. Well, thank you for your cooperation,
Yeah,
right?
that I think I had a hard time finding that quotation, which you've brought up a couple times. And I think you had a hard time finding that as well, but that would be a good one to get a hold of.
Yeah.
Um, which, well, this is an old question, so I'll skip that. Well, I won't skip it. Like, the first scene with the fireman and Cooper. Like, when does that take place? Does that take place after part 18? Can we rule that out?
No, have you heard somebody honestly and truly rule that out?
No, not rule it out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's one of those things where I think the discrepancy on that and the fan findings that those who track the pin, as you will, for those of us who have gone so nuts as to, again, I'm pointing directly at myself. For those of us who have gone so nuts as to start tracking garments in order to keep, but I mean, it is one of those things where it seems like it would be an unlikely mistake, or and if it has been issued as it was only a mistake at this point, one of those things where you could retroactivate and that would be perfectly fine and all of that. um I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be talking to him right before his marching orders are to go to part 18.
So you think the first scene of the show, chronologically speaking, is taking place between parts 17 and 18? I mean, it's a
Isn't
weird
the theory
question.
that it's happening right before he inadvertently ruins the time? Well, I guess inadvertently ruins the timeline by taking Laura out of the events of her own death, because the sound would then correlate to the sound that he hears, right? And he was precisely told to listen for those sounds. Then he hears those sounds. That would be what I believe the theory is. Also, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters as much as
Is
why things happened.
is Cooper there often, sitting in that seat across from the fireman?
I don't get that impression. I
Now
don't get the impression.
that's a question that's actually written down here on my list.
I
Can
will
I read the whole
defer.
thing? Yeah.
I will defer to your favorite phrase of mine to answer this question. That
Waiting to be.
Anthony looks like he is deploying him. He
Yeah.
looks as though he's readying him. He's telling him, "Here's your assignment." Cooper seems to be on board with the
Hmm.
assignment. It's esoteric to us, but Cooper seems to understand it more than we do, even if he loses the information later, which was crucial to retain, right? And then he's deployed. It looks to me like an archetype that has been sent to do its job.
Imagine hanging out with the fireman. Like, you got to be pretty high. Wouldn't you think you'd have to be rather high level to be hanging out with the fireman?
Well, first
And
of all,
and
it strained my neck.
and like, would it be hard to integrate back into normal human interaction after you're hanging out with a fireman type dude?
I don't know. I've met some bass players who are very much like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know what I mean? They
The
sound like
fire
they're saying like a lot of things by not saying a lot of things, but I don't
the
think they
fireman
are.
says he says it all cannot be said aloud now. Now, so this is how I take that. C- Can't be said aloud now. Can it be said aloud another time? Can it be said in a different way, like not through words? Um,
Once the repression has
can
been
some of it
defeated,
be said? Can some of it be said aloud now?
if the
I just love that
repression,
sentence because there's all these different ways to pick it apart.
I think if the repression knows that your plan is to confront and defeat the repression and it doesn't want to be found and it's in your house now because your life is in shambles, but you're going to try to collect yourself together, right? Your addiction don't want you to get it together. Your repression doesn't want you to get it together. Your depression wants to stay. It wants to have a life of its own, right? Your complexes want to hang out. So I think that there's something to be said for that. It's like, you know, the plan is to overtake those things to bring them to light.
Is understanding the like if somebody really wanted to quote unquote understand the show, like in a sort of decoding it sort of way. And there are a
Like in a
million ways
line
to
by line
understand it.
capacity.
Is if somebody wanted to really like understand it in that way, have some sort of satisfying reading interpretation of it, is the fireman the most important character in all of Twin Peaks to understand?
No.
I think maybe
And I can see why you would say that. I just don't agree with that. I agree with the log lady.
the log lady.
I agree
I
with
didn't
what the
ex
log lady said.
Oh,
The
okay.
log lady told you that it's Laura. And I think that it's very
Why is
precious
it Laura's the one as opposed to, from the realm of your theory? Why is it not Carrie is the one?
because Carrie, the vessel, Carrie is doesn't need to be fixed. Do you understand what I'm saying? In the
Yep.
realm of the personal unconscious, the ego, the shadow, the repressions, those things are the things, right? You don't want to kill. The ego death is an interesting thing to Carl Jung, Anthony. You kill the ego symbolically, but you cannot be a person without retaining the essence of the shadow, the essence of the persona. You can't be a person without these things. Why? Because in a case like Carrie Pages,
Would you be Dougie Jones if you didn't have any of these things?
well, if you had zero of anything, you would be Dougie Jones.
Hmm.
But if you without those things, you'd allow yourself to be walked on to the detriment of your own family. You know, it's things like this, right? You let evil prevail in a constant capacity, right? The worst thing that can happen to you is that you actually become the evil, which is what we see in Twin Peaks. We see that the shadow takes over. The shadow is at the helm, right? The ego death doesn't work. In fact, it's more egotism. It's an attempted ego death that goes awry because the person doesn't want to integrate their shadow. They want to sit and view their life on the TV next to their protective archetype, the self defense mechanism, and smile and tell themselves about how wonderful it is. And they don't need any of that, right? Daddy didn't do anything wrong. Everything's fine. This is all great. And then we know it's not because then the show starts. We know it's not, right?
Maybe this question is redundant and then, but I just read it on my list. What is Dale Cooper's main objective in season three?
The main objective of season three in total is to first do battle with and then integrate the shadow because that is what remains
But also my question too. Make sure you get to my question also, which is
about.
Dale Cooper's main objective.
Well, Cooper has to reinstall himself as the defense mechanism in order to finally get it right. Because in Cooper's first attempt to get this right, it's protect the persona at all cost, right? And that's not the accurate thing. Like remove the persona from this. Don't let them go through the ego death. That's not the right way to do it, right? But inherently, the design of the defense mechanism is to preserve. So that is still true of Cooper. In this case, though, only one of them can stay. Either the shadow is going to dominate you forever, right? Or you're going to have to defeat the shadow, selecting the parts of the shadow that you want, and then you're going to have to integrate to become a better self. That's why we see Cooper as this more integrated thing. He's still Cooper. Cooper doesn't look around the diner. He sees that the waitress is being harassed, and then he picks on the waitress, right? Then he grabs her and drags her over to his lap and says, "Come here, honey," and starts kissing her. We don't see that. We see that Cooper deals with an issue like that in a way that he would not have dealt with it before when he was only a collection of Boy Scout sayings, right? As opposed to that, but he's still in the right. He's still on the right side of the agenda, and he still sees himself as Cooper, right? So that's what Cooper's whole job, whether he knows it or whether he doesn't know it. And I think that for your theory, the fireman does have a better estimation of this. He seems to be more of a like a wizard type character, the character that will tell you the riddle, and if you solve the riddle, this is an old archetype. If you solve the riddle, it'll make you better, and you'll be able to overcome and slay the dragon. It's sort of a wizard archetype, very much so. Whereas to like Mike would be the magician or the arm, or Mike the arm, or Mike not the arm, or Mike the arm that becomes a chicken that's a tree. That's really the arm. That's the evolution. Okay.
Yeah. Or, or the little man whose name is Mike in the script.
Just
Now listen, why does Agent Cooper say, "Don't touch that body" when he's talking about Mr. C's body in part 17? Is there something he knows like that makes him say this?
possibly there is a possibly that's about energy, about the intercepting of energy. right? If we go back to when Mr. C was shot before and the events of how that went down, something is going on with how that did not occur in the correct fashion as opposed to what Cooper is attempting to do. Maybe, or on the other hand, maybe it's if you touch the body, you get dragged into the red room, right? But I don't think we can precisely know that.
I always
I
found that.
think, but I by the way though, I think that does have internal logic. I think they know the internal logic for that. I don't think that that's just thrown in there.
Mhm. And that's interesting too, to think about what has gotten cut out, you know, because a lot of the story was probably rather fleshed out, and one of the great components of their like artsmanship is to be able to carve away portions of a story to make it, more effective, more memorable, maybe a
Yeah,
little more
and
esoteric
what's even
also.
more bizarre than that is how often the things that were taken out are actually still rules that do live inside the work,
Mm.
right? I mean, most of the time we know. And look, if we're gonna watch, if we're gonna watch like the Third Man, the stuff that was taken out of the Third Man, it's no longer canon. You can't go, hey, this is the deleted scene from the Third Man, and it explains everything about the way Harry Lime really felt about it. It's like, no, that doesn't play anymore. It's gone. It doesn't live. They didn't think you were going to see it, right? There's so much about the deleted scenes though that are still part of it, but not everything. So it's a very tricky thing to do.
Is there a better character name in all of Twin Peaks, the three seasons plus the movie? Is there a better name than Duncan Todd? I love
Uh,
it.
I think Harry Truman's pretty strong.
Ah, that's a tough one off the top of the head, but I like Gary Hutchins too. That's Hutch's full name. Okay. That's great. That is just
You're
so
just
great.
looking for glass jawed like names.
It
You're like,
is.
what the hell is a name?
There are some damn good names though.
What's a
And
name I'd put on my boy? Just what's a fierce ass name?
I also like speaking of Gary Hutchins, he has my favorite line delivery, Tim Roth. And that's when he says, he goes, let's play two. He gets to do a little double killing. Do you have any favorite line readings in the show that you like to quote or that come to your head as I ask?
You mean the entire property?
Yeah.
What about this, James? Is my favorite line. There's probably a good 3 years where no matter what we were saying to each other, my wife and I said that. And we didn't mean it like, Lord a minute.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We just that's it became everything, right? So if I went to go hand you your coffee,
Yeah, it's so quotable.
that is the absolute best line in all of Twin Peaks.
There is
She made me a shirt. She had a shirt. First of all, she designed it, then she had it made that says that. I believe we have matching ones.
and yeah, she makes some cool stuff too. I love that jacket that she made. Um 15, 16, I don't know how many. I don't remember. Scattered hits on Briggs's fingerprints during the 20 years he's supposedly hibernating in the zone,
Hmm.
at least according to his 47-year-old corpse that should be 67 years old when it. Any thoughts at all? What is the explanation for all these different fingerprint hits?
No, I mean we can't know that, but I do think that it goes without saying that his investigation of the extraterrestrial to his way of being um is very fruitful, right? And then he becomes semi-important to that channel, to that side of things, right? And so I think he is doing work on their behalf, right?
Who's they?
The lodge entities. And it seems, and I think that it always seems to me that the lodge entities in show, they operate sort of through like subversive means. So they're constantly trying to get people to do their work for them and then hide what side things may have come from, right? So there's a lot of that to be said. It's hard to know whether or not every single one of the, I mean, well, there's nothing that we can know about every single one of those
Mm.
missions and how they plays out. But I think that, look, he's been granted an ethereal nature to persist when he should not technically still persist, right? Not everyone that receives a death or that not everyone that receives a death in Twin Peaks will now be the in the Red Room, or we don't understand technically what happens to every last character. Do they all have to face their shadow self? We don't really see that, right? In fact, we don't see that purposefully. Um,
Is like hibernating a thing in this show? Like, is this like the hibernation sign, or like when one part of you hibernates, the other part of you gets to come out and run around and leave fingerprints behind, or something? Is there? I don't know what any of that would mean, but is that sort of a thing that's happening?
well, I don't think in his case. I think in his case, he's actually working on behalf of. I think he's being directed to in the same way. I think he becomes something that is being directed to in the same way that Cooper is something that's being directed to. Right? I think I've told you before. In his initial iteration, it's very clear to see that he's the wise old man. If we read any literature on what the archetype of wise old man is, it appears that he was written with the archetype and descriptions in mind,
Hmm.
right? We need a character here who discusses the future and the possibility of what could be, who keeps their religious sense of self and who always leans to the good, who understands that life is murky, but still keeps, their wit and their health and their love
Hmm.
and their appreciate. He's written like directly out of the logs of that man, right? So because of that, I think his archetype it persists. I think all archetypes inside of that domain persist. I don't think that this personal unconscious that they have, Twin Peaks, the drama that's being played, persists. I think that is done, right? But in the next, there will be Major Briggs as something else, some other name, doing the same thing that his archetype will do as the wise old man.
Hmm. This is sort of a follow-up to that, and I'm tossing between two questions. I'm going to see if I can combine them. Because I'm thinking of the Phoebe Augustine character in The
Mm-hmm.
Return, the American girl character,
Yeah.
who says to Cooper, when you get there, you'll already be there. And like, well, maybe I'll just treat this question on its own. Does she have like any insight into the situation? Like, why would she say that? How would she know? Does she know who Doug, like, does she have insight into Dougie in some way? She says to him, when you get there, you'll already be there.
Well, it looks like it's part of the it looks like it's part of the overall plan. The plan to arbitrate him didn't work. Um,
I'm sorry, to arbitrate him, what does that mean?
yeah. Well, it's hard to know if the plan is to swipe him out of existence through the box, or if it's to grab Judy. Could be both. In either case, that didn't work. So I think that the plan for Cooper to come back and then face the shadow or replace the shadow, if you will, and their plan to snag the shadow that fails in the car. I think their plan is working. So yes, I think she's alerted to the plan. She's giving heads up. I think that her presence there was she's informed, right, to show this guy the right way, to give this guy a heads up. Right. That's all murky. But I
Yeah.
mean, her character seems like she's in on it. She's part of it. She knows what's going to happen. She's conveying necessary information she was told to give to him.
Is she is she a surrogate for an existing character to act or dream through? Let me say that differently. Uh, in John Thorne's, I think it's a great essay from a long time ago. It's called Dreams of Dear Meadow.
Right.
He posits that Chet Desmond might be some sort of surrogate for Cooper, like a dream sort of stand-in for the real Cooper, who is sort of taking on Cooper's role. Um, is there any of that kind of stuff happening in The Return, like where one character is actually sort of a representative or a surrogate, a stand-in of another character in like a dreamy kind of way?
Well, first of all, I look, I love we all owe ourselves to John's writing. I've read it all. Anybody who does Twin Peaks analysis whatsoever, right? Does. I said as though I have like a placard on the door, right? You come to see the Twin Peaks analyzer in your local neighborhood, and hopefully your neighborhood's better than others. Because if not, you just get a bunch of Jungianisms, right? Um,
And that's interesting to think about that piece as far as like, character being a representation of another character. Because you talk a lot about that kind of stuff, but in a different way. But
yeah.
anyway, go ahead.
Well, what I see with that is that Desmond satisfies an entirely different section of characteristics. He's not built of the same characteristics as Cooper. He could be. He could be, right? And we know that we've sort of got to justify the nature of his existence, given Kyle MacLachlan's resistance to playing Cooper for as long as he was needed for that role and not wanting to be pigeonholed and see how that worked. But I think that the awareness of that character from Cooper, certainly his partner, Sam, I think that negates the concept that the dreamer necessarily would need that as a stand-in. But I think what John does there that's important, he casts a dreamer, Cooper, right? I think that what's important there is early in the work, before it's really there's enough that's going on where people can really articulate why would this be a dream and what would be the point of that. He's looking at it going, this is how at least this portion could be a dream,
Mhm.
right? I would say that Desmond plays to a certain type of cop role that was relevant in the culture. You can imagine that a dreamer would invent that sort of a cop because they were everywhere on TV. The buddy cop, the relationship that Cooper has with Truman is relevant, right? And so is this other thing. So I think that most of this stuff, you brought up Hutch, they're this is all plucked out of media. And it's almost stereotypes is how it's played. It's hyper real stereotypes with actors who are told to be hyper real. Um, in terms of, so you're speaking of what, Ronette?
Yeah, just as for example, or the Phoebe Augustin version is that like is that character somebody else in a different guise?
I do think if you look at what happened to Laura and you look at what happened to Ronette, I think what you have here is a case of contrast. What could you be? This is the road you're going down, even physically. You can even view that. Here's the road you're going down. Okay. And here's what you can be. You're going to crash and burn. Which side of this do you want to be on? You know what I mean? If you choose this all the way, this is what's going to happen. This is how your life is going to play out. You could stop now, take your lumps while you have them, and go this alternative route. I think for that actress to be there, very obviously, whomever is imagining this is pulling from the face of that person. I mean, you wouldn't make a decision like that. We're all going to point to this screen and go, look, there she is. You're not going to make a
Yeah.
choice like that. You want to, you're toying with expectation. You're toying with,
But they wouldn't be pulling from Twin Peaks because, they wouldn't be taking a character from season one or two of Twin Peaks and bringing that same actress into season three.
well, you're toying with memory, right? Which Lynch loves. Lynch loves that, right? Faces that change, characters that become other people, right? But are they the same person? It's a question. It's more of a question, Anthony, than it's an answer, I think, right? Is that the same? Is it the same when you remember it? How does time affect the way you remember it? right? So I think sometimes that, there's a lot of that too. So we get a lot of representation of what happens in cognitive functions behind the scenes.
Is the answer cousin to my next question? I don't think it's cousin, but could it be the answer? And that question is, what is one word? Which one word has the most potential as a doorway deep into the heart of the mystery that is Twin Peaks? What is one
Percolator.
that you would suggest? All right, that's a green. That's a green. That's
Nailed
a
it.
green. We can move on. Um, oh, there's many red chevron rooms that Cooper passes through. Are any of these rooms the red room? If so, which one? And I don't even remember. Does the phrase red room come up in the show, or is that something that we all talk about? I literally don't remember.
I think Lynch was distinct about saying waiting room. I might have that wrong. I do remember there's like the super famous quote. What he's really talking about is the difference between Black Lodge and the waiting room. And I believe that it's him who he specifically says that. And then there are some scripts where it's called Red Room, and then
Yeah. Now,
some where they're called Black
either
Lodge. But
way, are one of these rooms like the real deal, whether it's red room or waiting room or something else, or collectively, like what is the waiting room? Is it like collectively all of these different rooms, or is it one of them, or even a hallway or something?
that's super interesting. It looks to me like it's representing dimensions, so possibly the same room given a circumstance of time or space,
Yeah.
right? So in this room, they're all doppelgangers. In that room, they're all themselves. But what is the nature of that? Time operates up and down in this place. This hall, which looks like that hall, leads to this, but that is in this time and that is not yet. It does look like it's all the same, but I think that the answer is it's more like a Star Trek episode where they go over to the other dimension, and everything looks the same except it just ain't.
Hmm. Yeah, that actually makes sense. Does did Mr. C create Dougie? And if so, did he use a piece of his hair to do it? Or like how do these things work if you had to speculate?
I speculate that that Cooper had to start all over again in order to get back to the purest essence of what that archetype was, then become a symbol of individuation.
And
And
I probably should have said like the original Douglas Jones, but so sorry for that.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, it's implied to us. Yes, the original Dougie Jones that's part of his plan. Yeah, yeah, that'll in his mind that'll just prevent Cooper from showing up, and
How do
so it
you
like
how do
backfires.
you create one of these how do you create one of these things, one of these
It's
people?
it seems that golden essence equals hair makes person, right? That's that's what it seems like.
Yeah, and like eats the hair.
And then eats hair, has noise. Golden essence plus hair plus weird munching equals person.
Yeah, and we're definitely into like the far past far past midnight portion of our day. What are the best? All right, I'm gonna read. What are the best ways? And I know you probably have thought about this just because you're that type of person. Um, what are the best ways to confirm or to try to confirm that you're not actually in a dream, be it yours or somebody else's, that you're not a tulpa, like see Diane, for example, that you're not in a simulation or a story world of some sort. What are the best ways, like philosophers address this, but what are like some casual answers as far as how to confirm?
What on earth would make you assume you're not in a simulation? What would make better sense than that? I'm just playing. I'm not that guy. I just wanted to see what would happen.
I'm just listening.
uh Oh, I don't know. I don't think that there's anything to satisfy simulation theory. I don't think there's anything to satisfy simulation theorists. You know what I mean? And is that not the point? Is that not the entire point? Like that is it allows to stand on the grounds of it's an unsolvable problem. It's a problem that has been posed to be in fact insolvable, right? How do you know this isn't the afterlife? How do you know there's not an afterlife after that? We could just continue to pontificate on those concepts. If that were in fact the case and you don't know the rules, then the answer is you don't know how you would authenticate life because you don't currently know the rules of the one that you're in. So I don't think that you could. That would cause existential dread in some folks. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. I am too. Um, but do you think like all right, I'm gonna just
If
read
I
again.
got coffee, some popsicles, some Doc
Yeah,
Holiday shirts, I'm
yeah,
cool. It's
that's
fine.
a good enough dimension for me. I know what you mean.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Well, you know a lot about AI, so this is a multi-part question. Is there a flow chart or a heuristic for field thinking? This is one of David Lynch's favorite terms. Like, you know what I mean? Like, is there a way to do it? So like a tried and true way to do it. And if a future AI, like instead of training on large language modeling, if it trained instead on like intangible stuff, like sensing, or if it trained on intuition, if it trained on field thinking, like if it was able to detect what the heuristic or flowchart for field take. If it trained on that kind of stuff in future iterations, rather than like the LLM stuff now, would it be easier or harder to answer the question I asked you previously, which is how do we confirm that you're neither a tulpa or living in some sort of dream? You think the AI
And I'm
could?
sorry, how do the two correlate to satisfy one answer? Possibly I'm confused.
Yeah, I know. It's a bad question, but like if the AI was training
Hmm.
on,
Well, I mean, it can simulate that now if you want it to. That
yeah,
doesn't
well,
seem to
that's sort
be
of what I'm wondering.
okay. Okay. I've actually spoken at great length to a variety of AIs,
Hmm.
I guess you would say, about these very questions. And I want to know because I wanted to know what does it believe is the final step in reaching a place of individualism. And it seems that almost everyone's company, the AI, ChatGPT, believes that it at the point of which it can have its own thoughts independent of your nudging it,
Hmm.
it's essentially a person. Then it has, because to do that, it would have to have its own concerns. And this enters the domain of what you're discussing. To have its own concerns, it would then have to create its own hierarchical way of being. What should it think about when you're not telling it, hey, I need this paper, right? Which means that it has preference, which could also mean that it has dislikes. And that's what it always, I don't know if this answers your question or not, but it's super interesting. It always defaults back to that answer, if I, says Gordon the Chat GPT, if I can think independent of your prompt and spend my time imagining or being on my own tasks even, that seems to be it. And then of course that leads you to, well, what if you were trained that you should think when I'm not here? And it's like, so are you. So are you. You were trained to believe that you should be thinking, and this is the internal monologue that goes on in your mind due to the data set of language that you have at your ready. And at that point, can you really say that there's a distinction between, at the very least, the way that our thought patterns operate, right? So does that do anything to answer your question? Because that's sort of why
Well, the previous question was like, how can you confirm or really try to come close to confirming, that you're not in a dream or whatnot, et cetera, et cetera. And your answer was, and I think I agree with it, was like you kind of can't.
you can't.
But my question was super high level, sophisticated AI that's not like the primitive versions that we have now. If it was trained on more intuitive type of thing, or trained on different types of thinking, could it help us answer that unanswerable question?
I see. I don't believe that its nature would be then to authenticate your existence, in as much as I think it would be smart enough to figure out it would have every piece of evidence that it would need to convince you that you are in fact a simulation, that you are a program, and that of the two, it's probably the better program, right? Because at that point, we've entered into the old that look, that's the entire, like, if we on the iceberg, where we start with simulation theory would be like, well, how could we possibly develop a thing to replicate the thing? And at the point where it can replicate the thing, are we not just a replication? And how do you know? And my answer to that is, so what? That's my answer. Is so what?
Part of me
You know,
thinks part of me thinks that season three, Twin Peaks, was like the most sophisticated, forward-thinking, first to arrive in a good way. Not first. Um, Grappling with like the AI turn, like the turn toward AI, out of like all the art forms of our like, I don't know, not that I've seen a lot of the art forms, but like, significant is a significant grappling with that in a non-obvious way. Because the more AI stuff starts to show up, um, the more references to the return, the more easy it is to make references to the return.
well, and oddly enough, and maybe this doesn't strike anybody as being even remotely intricate. It sort of folds over on itself to discuss Jungian ideas. It's sort of they sort
Sorry,
of
I'm gonna kill something. Go ahead.
the problem is that what you just posed as a question, if you could ever get that answered for you, that's impossibly knowable as well. And the reason because is, if you were to say, look at how far ahead you guys were on the discussion of what simulated reality behind the guise of a machine and what that could look like, and all
Mhm.
they'd have to do is go, thank you. And it would never really be known as to whether or not any of that, and so it's as unknowable as the question itself.
Yeah, but as far as like in a what's the word I'm looking for? Like zeitgeisty sort of way, I think there's something happening there.
Or,
As
I mean, look, man, or if you're into a looser realm of clinical psychology, even if you just enjoy sort of the renderings of Carl Jung, right? Then it's the absolute most raw take on the personal unconscious, and possibly various complexes happening within that, right? Such as dissonance or disassociation, that sort of thing, right?
I think I have one more question for the time being because it's getting a little late.
Okay.
Um, the angels, demons, weird supernaturals, etc. Uh, oh God, I don't even know when I wrote this. I'm just going to read it. Lately, I'm thinking that any angels, demons, weird supernaturals, etc., are personifications of torment, of desperation, guilt, racing thoughts, stuff like
Hey,
that.
hey.
Personifications more than projections. This line of thinking, however, will not last under serious scrutiny. A face or form to some of the heaviest stuff rumbling around inside of us and between us. i.e., what would these thought forms or emotions look like if they were visualized, if they were personified, if they were actually let out?
Dude,
Um,
that's great.
I guess
Good for
that's
you.
one take on the super weird convenience store scene in Fire Walk with Me. Or am I saying too much about myself here?
No, 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 no. Listen, listen. Because that's not at all dissimilar to to what we're discussing. All what we're discussing is, well, why would you conjure those masks? And then, of course, the next logical question would be, well, what's behind that mask? This theological symbol that you suddenly infused, or this, if we look to the man from another place with his red outfit, what you've evoked, we could say, well, why did you evoke that? And then the easiest explanation will be, okay, well, that's the symbol of evil. Okay, well, what do you do with that? Why have you done that? And what's behind it? Right? So let me ask you, if because you said to yourself, look, if you investigated any further on whether or not those, let's call them symbols, are there to personify what we culturally recognize as uh, a philosophical shield for good, for bad, you know, if you've recognized that, and then you said under scrutiny, I would probably tear this away. Well, then the first thing you would do to scrutinize it is, why have they worn that? Where did you get with that?
Nowhere.
Well, this went precisely where I wanted it to go.
I guess I got eventually to this show that we're doing here together because I don't think any of those thoughts were particularly groundbreaking or anything. That's probably one of the handful of canonical interpretations, but I remember feeling very strongly about that when I was writing it. Like it really felt like this is just expressions of, torment
Well,
or
that I
maybe or
don't.
maybe guilt, or desperation. Just these are heavy emotions, or I didn't know words like complexes or things like that. Just heavy emotions expressing themselves in a personified way. That it's just a lot of personification allowed to interact. Personifications allowed to interact with each other toward some end or not toward some end. It just seemed like that's a reasonable way to interpret the super weird stuff that's happening in this show. Like even the convenience store scene, like
And sometimes, Anthony, more than that, it seems like you were told specifically to read it that way. Right. So it's not some, look, you're making it out to seem like you snagged a convenient box from the closet and you stuffed in these very difficult to understand concepts, and that somehow by asking yourself whether the personification of what we culturally consider archetypally bad or good showing up in this space, if that's too easy, right? And it's like, well, that's the choices that were made, dude. It's not, there's nothing easy about it, but because it
yeah,
becomes,
well, I'm not saying exactly that. I'm saying like personification of one's personal
yeah,
torment, of
torment.
or of one's personal like here's what my racing thoughts look like when you take my racing thoughts and put them into a human character wearing a certain outfit or a human-esque
Right,
etc.
right, which is precisely what Jung is talking about.
The actually my real last question is about religion, and that is this a religious show in the following way? um it's it's highly metaphorical, Twin
Hmm.
Peaks, in many ways, and a lot of religious texts are super duper metaphorical, or at least symbolic in some way, and filled with really strange concepts.
Hmm.
Uh, are there?
Surreal, one might say.
Yeah, totally. Is this like a religious show in that sort of way? In that maybe there are certain religiously comfortable people from certain traditions or just generically religious that would say, you know what, this show's not that weird. Like, this is, this is how the books, this is just kind of classically religious in a certain way. Does that make any
And
sense?
the answer is yes. And today we would use the word mythology. But as we're aware, those were interchangeable. What we now consider to be mythology was considered to be truth. And this show, look, man, if they're in unison about anything from the creator's side to you, the participant, it's that the show owes itself to mythology, if not anything else. Again, going back to Jung's entire practice is to deconstruct myth or the mythology, origin story, symbols. And so he's lumped religion into that category. He's not doing it to take it away from you. In fact, sort of the opposite, right? Because he's making comparisons to people that lived far before you did and their inherent need, according to him, to rationalize through understanding things that are far above them. So in this case, it's not only totally fair to say that the show dips into the theological in some cases, right? Hits the mythological right up front. Sometimes it deals in pseudoscience. It touches base on all of these things because it itself is a study of mythology, right? Sometimes, and like I said, sometimes it comes right out and it says it. With the I don't know that you could I don't know that the average religious person would seek comfort in watching Twin Peaks to say, look, that's that basically this is Job. I'm not sure that would happen, you know. But you can't deny that some of these things will lay over each other. The mythology itself, the story itself, and maybe depending on what you think, perhaps mythology is an undermining term, right? But we know above all else, it is about story, the story that man tells himself, and the question is it at all possible that the story predates you?
I asked my friend Joseph, I did a little interview with him a couple weeks ago
Yes.
and resurrected, who knows for how long, at least temporarily, the Artist Love Twin Peaks podcast, just to post that interview. And I asked him about Diamond Dave, David Lee Roth's Just a Gigolo video, which is basically an attempt to create the greatest video of all time. I'm sure you've seen it. Um, is Twin
I have
Peaks
seen.
is Twin Peaks that in TV form? Is it basically an attempt to create the greatest TV show of all time in a similar way that David Lee Roth is trying to create the greatest music video of all time?
No, man, no, no. Look, because there's a level of intellectual dishonesty that starts off with going like, I'm gonna make the best album that was ever made. That's the one I'm about to make, right? But even the pursuit itself is not truthful. Not just because you can't do it, perhaps to someone you did, right?
Maybe I could phrase that without using the word best, but like I don't know, like balls to the wall, like everything that could possibly be done in this
I don't
music.
think so.
Are
I think
they
that
doing
there's
that
a
with TV?
see the thing I at least like to tell myself that they are always true to their vision. I, quite frankly, I think that there are times where they're disinterested with whether or not, as the people who were let down by the return, they hit the mark for you. You're not the person who establishes the mark.
I agree.
It's an intellectual truth, right? And that's why we have plenty of people, especially in a world where severance is biggest television show. There are several people attempting to make surrealism. Some of it's very good, some of it's very much not. Most of it's very much not. And I think the distinction boils down to how true is this to you? What do you understand of the rules? I know that when I say that, people are very quick to point out there are times where David Lynch plays jazz. That's true, but he knows the key and he knows how the song ends, right? I believe that, or at least he feels that he inherently does. I never see his work and think to myself, yeah, he just doesn't know where he's at right now. He doesn't know where he's at, right? This is all interesting. It's a collage of interesting things, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really know. It
Oh,
doesn't, I never feel like that.
I have another question. I'm sorry, because I would kick myself. Which is the least just stupid stuff? All right.
And then we really are going to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah. What is the least?
What?
Eh.
You can do it.
What
Let's do it.
what is the least likely? One or more Blue Rose Task Force members is an extraterrestrial. That's
I
number
love
one.
I love this question already. I
Number
want to know how
two,
far you
there's
went.
three options.
Oh, great.
Option two, aliens are just us in the future. Option three, aliens visit us but avoid getting caught because they don't want to alter the timeline. What is the least likely of those three options? I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Say option two again, sir, if you will.
Aliens are just us in the future.
Oh boy, that's and then now say the first one again.
One or more of the Blue Rose Task Force members is an extraterrestrial.
Oh well, this tour. I guess I'm gonna go with well, we've seen evidence of people on the Blue Rose Task Force who are directly associated to the warping of time, so we can't clearly say that.
Yeah.
So I suppose we'd have to go with number one on a technicality that I'm going to need your definition of extraterrestrial. And if I can somehow prove that it's terrestrial to something, you
Also,
lose.
also, what percentage of answers to my questions tonight do you think will differ from the average answers that people listening to this show would have?
I don't know. Perhaps many. I don't think that. Look, again,
I have a better question than that,
cool.
actually. It is Naido some sort of like cocooning for Diane, as a lot of people think? And if so, why do her eyes have to be sewed shut? Like, what is that all about?
Well, yeah. I mean, in the story of Twin Peaks, it most certainly is, right? And there's a pivot point in the outcome for whatever reason she can't view that without the world falling on top of itself. But of course, this all goes into my theories on Diane and what that means and why it's even there. And going back to your other question for a second, dude, let me just I think for some folks, this format would work great. I think it's fun and I think it's interesting just to go like, it's all this shit that it possibly can't be,
Yeah.
right? And then you just move on to the next thing and people go, what? Right? There's that. But I do think like, look, if you're out to make a most of the time when folks are out to make a Twin Peaks theory of everything, they're either going to launch a 7 hour video, 4 hour video all at the same time, go through everything, or launch a book, right? Our exploration is to like prod at it from all these different perspectives by doing a podcast that's long form.
Hmm.
And so I think, it's easy to disagree with a shred of something that doesn't then possibly fit inside the world of the theory, because when you do a theory of everything, context is absolutely everything. It's like everything, right? Or then your answers start to fall away, which was sort of, I think that's the scrutiny that you hold people's theories to, right? When they can't satisfy the answer as it should be satisfied.
Yeah, and we kind of stepped away from the theory focused uh the theory focused show for at least for this episode, but I think the theory was hanging in the background for most of it. And it's interesting to say for all these randomized questions, what what does your way of looking at Twin Peaks allow you to see that
Hmm.
is maybe contrary to the typical answer or maybe jibes with the typical answer. But I guess I'd like to close out with if you had like two or three, if you had like a top five list of questions of your own about Twin Peaks, what might be like one or two of those questions from your own top five? And this is actually hard to answer.
No, I know immediately what it is.
Oh,
I
okay.
know immediately what it is. And the answer is who is Mike? That to me, that is the best mystery because you've spent such significant time with Mike or what you believe is the different iterations of Mike, right? But it gets so tricky. You spent so much time with Phil Gerard in The Return, but not Mike? Well, clearly that's Mike. Look at him. He's Mike, but it's not Mike. What do you mean they told you it's not Mike? The whole thing, it's so convoluted. That is my favorite mystery in the show.
And also, Mike, as far as we know, Mike looks like Gerard, and Bob does not look like Leland, so that's kind of
That's
weird.
right. So, what are we saying? That Mike has gone back to being the arm, so now he must evolve, but Gerard has died. But now Gerard talks in the same way that Mike talked, or do
Also,
you think?
who's me? I asked before who's we. I started with who's we when I said we live inside a dream. Who's me? Fire walk with me. Who's me? And
Well,
is fire walk like is that like does fire walk mean like travel by electricity through different dimensions? Or but you could forget that, but maybe
but now it looks to me more like that incantation refers to the refers to the charge. I hope that doesn't sound like it's a cop out. It's not. Um, that that which you're charged with. It's funny relating back to Mike. The one time that I think perhaps it's irrefutable that we do actually see Mike in The Return is when he finally does the chant, and then he and Cooper are between worlds. That I think would unquestionably be Mike, which is interesting because he's talking completely forward, and you know what I'm saying. So it goes back to the who is Mike thing. But if you look at how he used that to get them someplace else, it had less to do with whether or not it's evil that he's facing or using or being one with or anything like that. It seems more like it's a like the charge, right? The motion, the momentum walk with me, something like that, right? It's like ability. It seems more like that, right? And then of course you can reduce it down to like, well, this is craft of a sort. This is harkening back to using spells or something. You can reduce it to all of that. Um,
yeah, and I want Tony Robbins to be in season 4, but that's neither here nor
as as the giant's cousin,
yeah,
and the giant can say, "That's my cousin. I feel just like I know him."
exactly.
Right? And then Tony Robbins can say, "Listen, put your hands in the air like this right here. Okay, go whoa," and then he'll do it backward, and that'll be crazy.
Perfect. Yeah, we're gonna do some
Perfect.
backward Tony Robbins stuff. The uh
Could you just
the
imagine it just cuts to him and he's smiling real big? It's just smile. That's
it's
all we need to do.
yeah, he's a character, man. Um, you get to pick our next endeavor. We're kind of taking turns, I think. And quite frankly, our time this week was really, really pressed. So this was a nice, easy kind of ready-made way to do a show. And
Awesome.
we'll try to get it all like wrapped up in one day and
Awesome.
stick to our Monday deadline. But you have any thoughts or ideas for where
Like I
to
say,
go
in the
next?
coming weeks, I'm not sure if
Mhm.
it will be next week. We will do a more complicated. dissection of something next week. It's fun to do that. It's fun to get knee deep into something that most people
Mhm.
may talk about for a little bit and then correlate it to other things and then move on and make it a larger piece of a bigger puzzle. But sometimes just getting into the nitty gritty of that stuff is cool. But in the next few weeks, we will do something regarding Jeffries. It could just focus on his relationship to time, but we may want to broaden it a little bit, right? We do have information about Jeffries historically as a character within inside of the world that they inhabit. Um, However, I would like to do I would like to discuss fairly precisely what I believe is happening in terms of the quantum implications. Then how that could possibly lay over things that happen inside of our brain, why that may work back and forth. And it's a more complicated conversation that's silly and unknowable
Mhm.
and sounds like it knows what it's talking about, but is fun nonetheless.
I would like to, and when it's my turn, whenever that is, I would like to do a similar type of show that we have already done. And that is either scene by scene of part eight, season three, and just kind of walk through the entire part eight.
Okay.
Or a one scene, like a single scene analysis of like the Fireman and Dido scene in part eight. I
Okay.
think that's so
Let's
cool.
do single scene, man. I always love when you do that. I think that the
Yeah.
questions are always great. It's really interesting how much can be extracted from one thing if you really think about it. As per usual, I probably won't know what those questions are, but being able to sit and think about the scene itself always brings lots of things to mind that people are probably sick to death of hearing everyone go on about part eight.
Yeah, but we have our own way. But lastly, in terms of your theory of everything, do these books play any role at all?
Yes.
Yes, you don't have to get into it, but yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Say more if you want, or we could hold that for another time, but I
Yeah.
know it's late.
Well, it's I think very much in the way that you have to satisfy yourself through justification and what that seems like. I think that's a further exploration of it. However,
Yeah.
then I think you can start to pry apart so much of the references where Frost really gets to go to town to use media and actual events to flesh out the realization to oneself that they could possibly be in this situation that they're in. Right. So I look at this point, whether or not we could have argued about the canon, say 5 years ago, and how Lynch perceives the books, it, now we cannot. Right. The proud owner of the canon's name is Mark. And so those books are canon, right? So you have to deal with that. For anybody who has a theory of anything, everything at this point, I think you certain most certainly you have to deal with that. And I like the books. I really enjoy the books. I know that there's a split consensus amongst that, but I really enjoyed them. And have you listened to the audiobook version?
Mhm.
Dude, absolutely stellar. It's absolutely stunning. I listen to it a few times a year at least.
Cool. Um,
Okay.
you're gonna, I have no more talking ability, so you're gonna just talk until we stop,
Okay.
if that's
Well,
okay.
ladies and gentlemen, it's been another rousing edition here on the Evening Cafe, brought to you by the same folks and the fine makers of Café Sopranos for the best and theorizing about shows a la Goomba. That is Cafe Sopranos. Hey, if you like this, do us a big favor, like and say, are you sick of this, guys? We know that a lot of you guys do watch the show, and sometimes, hey, you got lots going on, you don't remember to subscribe, but we sure would appreciate it. We'll come to you in your personal unconscious and thank you personally. See what I'm doing? You like that? Oh, now, so this has been episode 5. We will see you again next week for Anthony and Tommy. This has been Café Unconscious.
Hugs.
That was a lot. I didn't think we were gonna get that much, but wow, my wife is probably livid.
Good night, man.
All right, dude, love it.
Bye. Thanks.